What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everyone's doing well out there today. We're talking about the running backs, so we're going to start and sit here in Week 7 fantasy football. Now, a few of these backfields starting to shape it out a little bit. We have a pretty good understanding of what's going on week to week. And then there's a few backfields in the NFL that it's like a dart throw, right? I don't even know if the coaching staff knows what's going on for some of these teams as of right now. But before we get into all these matchups, I have to announce a winner. On this show, last week, I said I had a signed Joe Mixon jersey. All you needed to do is hit that like button, leave a comment down below, make sure you have your free account signed up at pristineauction.com, and you are entered to win. Well, I have randomly selected a winner, and it's none other than Jordan Borad. Congratulations, Jorad. He left a comment on last week's video. He was randomly selected, so do me a favor here, Jordan. Send me an email from that account right there to info@thefantasyheadliners.com. I'll get your information, and I will get it shipped out to you. My friend, thank you so much for watching the show, and be on the lookout because Kyle may have himself a straight banger of a giveaway for tomorrow's wide receiver video, so you don't want to miss out on that one either. But now let's go ahead and dive into these matchups. Let's kick it off Thursday Night Football with the New Orleans Saints going up against my lowly Arizona Cardinals. But before we talk about my Cardinals, let's kick it off with the New Orleans Saints. Let's talk about Alvin Kamara, who's currently averaging right around 12 fantasy points per game, which is going to kind of put him right there in that top 15 area or so. He is really benefiting right now from really being the only healthy thing in this offense each and every week. A lot of their pass catchers are still banged up, but with Alvin Kamara being that only option, he's starting to creep towards 20 touches a game, which we absolutely love to see. But now he's going up against Arizona. They allow right around 18.7 fantasy points per game, 22nd most in the NFL. They're not always an easy defense to run. I guess it depends on what week they show up, right? Some weeks they show up, some weeks they don't. Kenneth Walker didn't make him look that good last week either, so obviously not a bad matchup for Alvin Kamara. I still expect multiple pass-catching weapons in this offense to be banged up, which means we're going to get an opportunity for even more Alvin Kamara once again. He's obviously going to be a start for me here in Week 7. On the other side of the football, it is pretty disgusting, right? I mean, this backfield, no one is even close to sniffing 10 fantasy points per game. Now they're getting DeAndre Hopkins back. They've lost Hollywood Brown for some time. They traded for Robbie Anderson. Why? That's why bad teams continue to be bad. Now, Eno Benjamin coming off a season high in 18 touches is the lead guy in this backfield, but didn't really do anything that made us go, oh, wow, this is somebody we really want to start each and every week. And now a matchup going up against New Orleans. They only allow 17 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. There's multiple offensive line injuries in Arizona. James Conner is still not practicing, which is not a good sign. Eno is even banged up himself with a minor foot injury from just last week's game. This backfield wasn't producing when everyone was healthy. What makes me want to sit here and start them when almost everyone is hurt in a Thursday night game and we continually see a lack of production? I don't want to start anybody. That's why they're both sits here in Arizona for me, and I'll just take that risk. If someone happens to pop off in Arizona, that's a risk I'm willing to take because the opposite is going to be like 3 points, and I don't want that in my lineup either. Why don't we move over to Sunday football now? The Cleveland Browns, Baltimore Ravens. We'll start off with the Cleveland Browns and Nick Chubb. A down week last week for Nick Chubb going up against the New England Patriots. I kind of mentioned it in last week's episode that, hey, this matchup going to be pretty tough. Dropped him down a couple spots in the rankings, but he's still the running back 2 overall in fantasy football. And Kareem Hunt just seems to kind of be like drifting off into the sunset, right? He's almost an afterthought in Cleveland at this point. It was a season low in touches just last week for Nick Chubb in Week 6 with only 13, but Hunt has had now 3 straight weeks in which he's seen a decrease in snaps on the field. It's Chubb or nothing right now in the backfield for the Cleveland Browns, and they're going up against the Baltimore Ravens. They allow 19 fantasy points per game to their opposing running backs. There are still multiple injuries here on the offensive line. It's not ideal. You got Joe Haig, Jack Conklin, Wyatt Teller. Multiple Pro Bowl offensive linemen are hurt right now for the Cleveland Browns. Are they going to have a chance to play this weekend? We have our fingers crossed. We're hoping, because despite being a down week in Week 6 for Nick Chubb, he still remains this team's top offensive weapon. He's their best chance to win each and every week. They have to control time of possession. They have to run the ball effectively. They have to find the end zone. It's really what they have to do to have a chance in winning any game every single week. That's not going to change. We're still starting Nick Chubb. Of course, his opponents, not so much. This is like the definition of a hot mess right here. You have J.K. Dobbins with his knee tightening up, whatever the hell that means. Drake out there looking like an all-pro running back once again. Gus Edwards is getting close to returning. Oh yeah, and then let's just sprinkle on top that we could also get Justice Hill back this week as well. With Dobbins kind of up in the air right now, it's really leading to a lot of confusion in this backfield. He only had 7 touches in week 6 before leaving that game. Drake then picked up the slack with 11 touches after that and did a whole lot with them. But now they're going up against Cleveland, who allows the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing running backs in the NFL at 26.5 fantasy points per game. That is a crap ton of points per game, and we don't have a damn lead running back to say that they're going to get the volume to start them. Dobbins kind of going backwards in his rehabilitation, coming back from the torn ACL. That is not a good sign to me. I talked to the doc and he says he doesn't trust him this week. Gus, we haven't really seen fully healthy. Justice Hill coming off of an injury. There's still multiple injuries on this offensive line. Does everybody want to put all their eggs in the Kenyon Drake basket? I mean, there's going to be a split here of some sort, but there's just no clarity on who it's going to be between. Great matchup, but for who? I'm only considering Kenyon Drake if J.K. Dobbins is ruled out for whatever reason. If they're all playing, this is a total mess, a total crapshoot. You're banking on the fact of trying to find the one that finds the end zone, and that's ridiculously hard in a matchup like this. Honestly, right now I prefer to sit them all. How about we go down to Tampa Bay and Carolina? And it's going to be my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. Don't forget, as soon as this video is over, head over to manscaped.com. The holiday season is right around the corner. I don't care if you have somebody to buy something for, or if you just want to buy it for yourself and be greedy. There are tons of things to make sure you have everything you need to be good to go this holiday season at manscaped.com. Use referral code HEADLINERS at checkout for 20% off and free shipping. But this is going to be a fun matchup to watch between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Carolina Panthers. We have Leonard Fournette on one side against Christian McCaffrey on the other. For Leonard Fournette right now, currently running back 5 overall in fantasy football, averaging just over 16 fantasy points per game. One of only 7 running backs in the entire league, averaging over 20 touches per game as well. Has 20 plus touches in 3 of his last 6 games played, and at least 6 targets in 4 straight. Lenny is getting the football. Now a matchup going up against Carolina. They allow the 8th most fantasy points to opposing running backs at 23.1 per game. No major other injury concerns affecting Leonard Fournette right now, but this offense is kind of sputtering overall. But really the one thing they have going for them weekly right now is Leonard Fournette. Now, he may be slightly touchdown dependent, but he's getting those opportunities in this offense because they're not finding the success down the field in the passing game as much. He's been their most consistent scorer. We're obviously starting Leonard Fournette and his opponent, Christian McCaffrey. He's currently running back 4 overall. So a matchup against running back 4 against running back 5. Christian McCaffrey averaging 17 fantasy points per game. He is the Carolina Panthers offense, the lone bright spot there in Carolina, and really the only one on the team that can move the chains consistently. He's averaging almost 20 touches a game himself. He's seen a little bit less work on the ground here as of late, but has had at least 8 targets in 3 straight ball games. Now he's going up against Tampa Bay. They're not the easiest team to run against, but they are allowing 14.3 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. But no major injuries right now affecting Christian McCaffrey. It's kind of a tough matchup. It's a struggling offense. It can really limit the touchdown opportunities, but with the volume that Christian McCaffrey is getting, especially in the passing game, it's boosting his floor right back up to kind of where we saw it in years past. The ceilings, they may be slightly lower just due to the team not being very good, but the floor is still safe. We're obviously starting the running back 4 overall in fantasy football in Christian McCaffrey. How about we go down to Atlanta and Cincinnati now? For Atlanta, you got Tyler Algier and Caleb Huntley. I love that both of these guys are seeing between 12 and 15 touches each week. The problem is they're getting the volume, but they're not doing a whole lot with it. Touchdown chances just aren't there, and if they are, they're kind of going towards Marcus Mariota right now. But ever since we saw Cordero Patterson go down with injury, this has been dang near a 50-50 split between these two. It's not ideal when you have a low-producing backfield as is. Now a matchup going up against Cincinnati, they allow the 7th fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs at only 16.4 points per game. No other major injury concerns right now affecting the backfield here in Atlanta, but they are very big play touchdown dependent. In a tough matchup with a scrambling quarterback and minimal goal line opportunities, nothing on paper says to start either one of these guys as of right now. On the opposite side of the football, you got Joe Mixon. Now, he's down all the way to running back 14 overall, which is not ideal. But looking at the last 2 games, I have some good news for you. Both his yards before and after contact are up exponentially over the last couple games. The offensive line is slowly improving, and Mixon is making more happen with the touches that he's getting. He's coming off a week 6 in which he only saw 12 total touches. Not ideal. Lowest of the year. But the efficiency started to improve. He's now over 5.5 yards per carry in back-to-back games in a matchup going up against Atlanta that allows over 18 fantasy points per game. No other major injury concerns here, and it's really all tied together. Look at this as kind of like a math equation or a puzzle, whatever you want to call it. When the passing game opens up, that's less pressure on the offensive line, right? Defenders have to back up a little bit. They have to account for all of those pass catching weapons. Less defenders in the box, less defenders to block, less pressure on the offensive line, which also means more running lanes for Joe Mixon. If they can really continue to extend this passing game down the field, that is going to boost the efficiency of Joe Mixon to where he doesn't need 30 touches a game. If he can get in that neighborhood of 18 to 20 with the boosted efficiency, we're going to see big numbers once again, and you know there's going to be more touchdowns as well. He's going to be a start. How about the Detroit Lions and Dallas Cowboys now? For the Lions, you got DeAndre Swift back, hopefully, right? Sounds like all signs are pointing to he should be back this week with Jamal Williams. And both these guys are averaging right around 15 fantasy points per game. Hopefully they're coming off the bye week healthy. Now, we know that Jamal Williams had a role in this offense, even with a healthy DeAndre Swift. So it's not like all of a sudden Jamal Williams is just somebody to forget about. He's still going to be in that neighborhood of 12 to 13 touches a game, even with Swift in the lineup, especially coming off of an injury. But this is not the easiest matchup for these guys going up against Dallas. Dallas only allows 16 fantasy points per game, which is 6th fewest in the NFL, to opposing running backs. Now, until it's official, we need to be somewhat careful with DeAndre Swift. We're kind of expecting him to be back this week. Like I said, all signs are pointing in that direction, but we have to be somewhat cautious with how available is he, especially since this is going to be a split backfield in a difficult matchup. As of right now, if DeAndre Swift plays, he's going to be like a mid running back 2 for me. I'm not going to just overly throw him up inside the top 12 in a difficult matchup coming off of an injury. Both these guys, mid to low end running back 2, flex plays, bye week fill-ins. Maybe you have yourself, a Darrell Henderson you were using, or a Dalvin Cook, a Miles Sanders. A flex play for one of those guys is absolutely in the cards for the backfield of the Detroit Lions here this week. But their opponents, Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard. Another one of those backfields that just makes you scratch your head a little bit, right? I mean, you got Zeke inching back into the top 24 overall running backs after week 6. But overall, on tape, Zeke looks pretty good. He just doesn't seem to have that high-end top speed, right? He still looks good behind the line of scrimmage. He's making defenders miss. He found the end zone last week. Those are all positive signs. Tony Pollard, still one of those big play dependent guys. In games in which Pollard hasn't had a big play, he's averaging under 4 yards per carry. He needs that big play to have a solid fantasy day. In week 6, we saw a pretty even split between these two, but overall on the season, Zeke still has the edge, averaging right around 17 touches per game. But this is a great matchup for these guys right here going up against the Detroit Lions. They allow the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing running backs at 26.8 points per game. I'm actually going to head over to Prize Picks right now and smash the over on Zeke, which is currently set at 65.5 rushing yards. That's a number he's beaten now in 3 of the last 4 games he's played. If you haven't checked out Prize Picks yet, be sure to do so. Download the app, use referral code Headliners. We'll match your deposit up to $100, and we're making a lot of money on Prize Picks and having some fun doing it in the process, so make sure you check that out. As far as injury concerns, we know the offensive line is pretty banged up. Does Dak return this week? That can make a difference in this running game. But when it comes to X Factor, I still have to consider these guys flex plays, bye-week fill-ins. It's not a backfield that has been overly productive consistently here this year so far in 2022 fantasy football. I have them both as starts. Zeke slightly higher because he sees more consistent volume each and every week, not as touchdown dependent, I guess you could say, as Tony Pollard, who really needs those big plays. But if you're looking for a flex play, a bye week fill-in, that's where I'll utilize Tony Pollard. Zeke, more that low end running back too. How about the New York Giants, Jacksonville Jaguars? Started off with Saquon Barkley. I'm going to ask you, the viewer, it's an easy one. Do you think we should start Saquon Barkley this week? I mean, he's the running back 3 on the season. What do you think? Of course you're starting Saquon Barkley this week. He's averaging over 23 touches a game, going up against Jacksonville, who allows the 6th most fantasy points to opposing running backs at 23.1 points per game. Most of the injuries on this team in New York actually benefit Saquon Barkley because it just leads to him getting more work. And now he's going up against the Jags, who, even though they do play a lot better overall at home, are still a decent matchup, right? They've been on the road 4 of the first 6 weeks of the season, have the Jags. But like I said, when they're at home, they play a little bit better. I'm trying to not overhype Saquon Barkley here and have everybody expecting a 30-point game and then get disappointed if he scores 18, right? That's not what we're looking for here, but obviously you're starting Saquon Barkley. His opponent, you got Travis Etienne and J-Rob James Robinson. With the way that the season started, had I told you going into week 7 that James Robinson would only be 16 points ahead of Travis Etienne going into week 7, you would have thought that I was absolutely nuts the way that James Robinson started. But now he's fading, and he's fading quickly. We've seen his snaps fall to under 30 snaps a game now in 2 of his last 3 games played, and we're really starting to see more and more and more Travis Etienne each and every week. Now a matchup going up against New York. They allow right on 18 fantasy points per game. No other major injury concerns. Jacksonville overall still pretty healthy. But another one of those situations, if you're looking for a bye week fill-in, that's where I'll utilize James Robinson because there's a lot of risk involved with him. But Travis Etienne, that big play ability, we're starting to see it a little bit more consistently. James Robinson, he's had less than 5 fantasy points in 3 straight games. Like I said, I would prefer to sit James Robinson if I could. I want to start to see him getting more snaps, if anything. Not so much the inefficiencies that worry me. It's the lack of time on the field right now that is worrying me. If you have better options, I'm looking for it. Bye-week fill-in at best. How about the Indianapolis Colts and Tennessee Titans? Now, Deion Jackson last week had more receptions in 1 game played than Jonathan Taylor has on the season. What the hell kind of WTF stat is that? Why wasn't Jonathan Taylor getting that kind of volume? That's kind of odd. I mean, we know he's still going to get touches, right? That's what Jonathan Taylor does. He gets volume. But in the first game, as being the man in this backfield, Deion Jackson had 22 touches before getting injured. He could have seen more. Now they're going up against the Tennessee Titans, who are harder to run on than throw on, allowing 17 fantasy points per game. Jonathan Taylor, Deion Jackson, Nyheim Hines, they're all questionable to play. Do we see Phillip Lindsay this weekend? We haven't seen much of him here over the last couple weeks with all of these injuries, but I really want to start whoever starts here. And you'll see that Deion Jackson has a score of 15, but it says sit, because I don't want people to just scroll through here, look at the graphics, and think that I want to start both of these guys if Jonathan Taylor is active. If Jonathan Taylor is 100% and playing, he's the start. If Jonathan Taylor is out, Deion Jackson then becomes the start. Just something we need to wait and see here as the week progresses. Their opponent, Derrick Henry, obviously, you're starting Derrick Henry. Welcome back off your bye week, King Henry. He's still in the top 10 despite having his bye week, which is kind of crazy already this early in the season, averaging over 17 fantasy points per game, almost 23 touches a week. Now going up against Indianapolis, they allow the 11th most fantasy points to opposing running backs at 21 fantasy points per game. Even though the offensive line is still banged up here, don't forget they lost Taylor Lewan a couple weeks back. Here's what I find really interesting about Derrick Henry. His career high for his career in receptions is 19 in a season. He has 10 receptions over his last 3 games played. That's the X factor we want for Derrick Henry, because when this guy is catching passes, it's when the eggplant gets excited, right? Obviously, we're starting Derrick Henry. How about the Green Bay Packers and Washington Commandos? And for Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. Right now, Aaron Jones is currently running back 15 overall in fantasy football, but I continue to see people in the comment section saying after week 6, they just want this guy off their team. Please don't do that. Don't overreact and just do something to get rid of the guy. A.J. Dillon, I get. He's been frustrating. He's done nothing. But Jones will win you matchups on any given week. Both of them right now getting right around 14 touches a game. Washington's allowing just about 20 fantasy points a week to opposing running backs. Even though the offensive line is still dealing with a few injuries, Randall Cobb is now out. We know that Sammy Watkins is out. Christian Watson is questionable to play. Aaron Rodgers wants to quote-unquote simplify the offense, which means go back to more of the running game and what was working earlier in the season. I'm still rolling with Aaron Jones. You can never afford to sit this guy. A.J. Dillon, like I said, I somewhat understand. Maybe in deeper leagues, multi-flex leagues, the guy's still getting volume, just not scoring any touchdowns, not getting any big plays either. Their opponents, another backfield that's kind of head-scratching, right? We got Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson. Now, Brian Robinson found the end zone in week 6. That was a great moment. But let's not just ignore the fact that he was pretty inefficient as well. 17 carries for 60 yards, 3.5 yards per carry. That is totally understandable. I'm not bashing Brian Robinson at all. I'm just trying to be realistic and not overhype something and over-expect results this soon. Both these guys averaging right around 13 touches per game, but then Ron Rivera came out and said he wants to get more touches to Antonio Gibson. I mean, that doesn't seem like that's what you want to do. Now they're going up against Green Bay. They allow right around 20 fantasy points per game, 13th most in the NFL. We know there's multiple offensive line injuries here in Washington. Carson Wentz is going to be out. Taylor Heineke's going to be under center. Jahan Dotson's still questionable, but I just can't get past the words of what Ron Rivera said and wanting to get Gibson more touches. That puts my brain like in a blender. I mean, their actions just say differently. He only just played 15 snaps and has seen less snaps in 6 straight weeks, and yet now you want to get the guy more work, even though you gave all the work away to a guy who just came off multiple gunshot wounds. What? I don't get it. As of right now, I'm still looking at Brian Robinson as being the guy to get the bulk of the touches in this backfield. I'm not buying the Ron Rivera hype. If there's a goal line touch, more times than not, I have to assume it's going towards Brian Robinson. He is where I'm going to go this week. For the Jets and the Broncos, for the Jets, Breece Hall is a man. He is up to running back 6 overall in fantasy football, averaging 15 fantasy points per game, has really taken over this backfield for the Jets. He's had a 100-yard receiving game and a 100-yard rushing game now in back-to-back weeks. No, not in the same game. He was receiving 2 weeks ago. He was rushing last week. Hall's touches have increased over 3 straight games played. He had 22 touches just last week, and Michael Carter's still hovering right around maybe 10 touches or so per game. Denver's defense lately as well been a little bit easier to run on. They're allowing 18.6 fantasy points per game. Really a bend but not break type defense here as of late. No other new major injury concerns for the Jets, but Breece Hall's volume in a changed offense, which has done a complete 180. This team was throwing the ball 50 times a game with Joe Flacco, is now throwing the ball maybe 20 times a game with Zach Wilson, and they're winning ball games because Breece Hall is that good. There's no way with this offense rolling this way that you can afford to sit Breece Hall. His opponents, you could probably afford to sit them. I mean, Nathaniel Hackett at this point has to be one of the worst coaches I've seen in some time. There's a lot of wasted talent right now in Denver. He's really turning his back on the players in which he's had all season long to turn to a guy he just claimed off of another team's practice squad. I mean, why does he hate Melvin Gordon and Mike Boone? Murray outtouched both of them, 16-3 for Gordon, 16-2 for Boone. Now a matchup going up against the Jets, whose defense is playing really, really good right now. They're allowing 19 fantasy points per game, but that number is dropping drastically every single week. We know there's multiple injuries on the offensive line here. Russell Wilson hasn't been playing great. Now he's dealing with a hamstring injury as well. But here's what really has me puzzled with this backfield. You're telling me to start the year that Melvin Gordon was good enough to take carries away from Javonte Williams, but now Melvin Gordon's not good enough to take away carries from Latavius Murray, who's like a 4.4 yard per carry guy. Like, you know what you're going to get with Latavius Murray. I don't understand this. He's going to start losing the locker room a little bit. You saw Melvin Gordon dejected after the game. Would have expected at least a little bit more to go the way of Mike Boone if they were still punishing Melvin for fumbles. Whatever it may be, it's head scratching, and there's a whole lot of crap going on in Denver that just, it's self-inflicted at this point. And I'm starting to really worry that this team with this much talent is going to have a horrible season if they don't figure out how to turn it around quickly. How about two teams coming off a bye now, the Houston Texans, Las Vegas Raiders? We'll start off with Dameon Pierce and the Texans coming out fresh off the bye week, right? Ready to go. Can we continue the momentum that we saw before the bye week? Don't forget, before the bye week, he had 3 straight games with 100-plus total yards and a touchdown. He's averaging right around 20 touches a game, including a 29-touch game the week before the bye in week 5. Going up against Las Vegas, they allow right around 19 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. No other main injury concerns here for Dameon Pierce. And of course, he's going to be a start. But I don't want to over-expect too much in this matchup, going up against a team that has had 2 weeks to really prepare for him. There's really not a whole lot going right for Houston overall on offense, right? So when you're looking at this team from a defensive perspective in Las Vegas, you need to try to limit Dameon Pierce, and you have a good chance of beating this team. So obviously he's a start, but he's just somebody I want to temper expectations slightly for Josh Jacobs. Kind of similar to Derrick Henry, right? Even though he's already had his bye week, he's still inside the top 10 and has had back-to-back games prior to the bye week with at least 170 total yards and 3 total touchdowns in just 2 games played. He's averaging 21 touches a game. He had 26-plus touches in back-to-back games, including 5-plus targets now in his last 3 games played. Now gets a matchup going up against Houston. They allow the most fantasy points to opposing running backs at 27.6 points per game. I'm heading right back over to Prize Picks once again, and I'm smashing the over on Josh Jacobs, which is currently set at 73.5 rushing yards. I think he can eclipse that against this defense in Houston. No other major injury concerns here, but there's always that thought in the back of my head, and maybe it has to do with the Bill Belichick coaching tree with one Josh McDaniels. It's his ability just to kind of screw with us and to maybe kind of do the Belichick thing and think that we're looking at Jacobs. In reality, he's going to be over here. Now, I don't think that happens with the way he's playing lately, but that's why I've dropped the X factor down a little bit. I just don't trust Josh McDaniels to not do something stupid, but you're obviously still starting Josh Jacobs. How about Seattle and the Chargers? Now we'll start off with Kenneth Walker. Great outing in his first start last week as being the guy in the backfield of Seattle Seahawks. More than anything, I really liked what I saw on tape from Kenneth Walker. I saw it pretty well. He was going against my Cardinals. Now, 110 yards overall and a touchdown, had 23 touches in his first ever game as a full-time starter. Now a matchup going up against the Chargers, who allow the 4th most fantasy points to opposing running backs at 25.5 per game. Even though that offensive line is still not 100% healthy in Seattle, with that many touches, 20 plus a week, it puts him into that must-start category each and every Sunday. We're starting Kenneth Walker. For his opponent, Austin Eckler. I sure hope you're starting Austin Eckler. It seems like not that long ago, people were bailing on Eckler because of his slow start. Now he's the overall running back 1 in fantasy football, has 6 touchdowns over his last 3 weeks played, hovering just around 20 touches a game, has had at least 6 receptions in 4 of the 6 games he's played this season, and now gets a matchup going up against Seattle, which allows 22.8 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. Now, it's apparent that Justin Herbert is not 100% healthy. Does Keenan Allen come back this week? Because we also know there's some banged up guys on this offensive line as well. We need that pass catching work. I'm going to lower the X factor just a little bit because I do expect Keenan Allen to make his return this week. No, I can't really see the future, but signs are starting to point towards the return of him here this week, and that could lose a little bit of pass catching work going the way of Austin Eckler, but he's still going to be a start. I don't know if anybody has ever sat the number 1 overall running back in fantasy football. And if you are, you're probably not very good at this game. How about the Kansas City Chiefs, San Francisco 49ers, another backfield that I don't think I want a whole lot to do with right now. Somehow CEH still sitting at running back 12 overall, despite having back-to-back duds. He only has 7.5 fantasy points in his last 2 games combined. None of the backs here in Kansas City are really getting much love lately, right? We got Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jerick McKinnon, Isaiah Pacheco. They're all kind of sharing scraps right now. San Francisco is still one of the best teams in the NFL against opposing running backs, despite being a little bit banged up on defense. They're only allowing 14.8 fantasy points per game to running backs. That's second fewest in the league. That's not a whole lot to go around when you're using 3 guys. Even though there's no major injury concerns here, all of these guys are touchdown dependent and haven't been producing anything to make you want to start them here over the last couple weeks. This is an offense that just continues to spread the ball around, and there's huge risk if you're having to start any one of these guys, especially in this matchup. What about their opponent, Jeff Wilson Jr.? Right now, currently still sitting inside the top 20 at running back 20. He had at least 74 total yards in the 4 weeks leading up to week 6, and then got 7 carries for 25 yards and lost a fumble that was returned for a touchdown. Only 7 touches? That ain't going to cut it. That's the fewest we've seen him have all year long. And it's not like Tevin Coleman was out there tearing it up and taking away his job. Tevin Coleman had 4 carries for 3 damn yards, so he didn't do anything either. Now a matchup going up against Kansas City. They allow the 5th most fantasy points to opposing running backs at 23.4 per game. Another team dealing with some injuries on the offensive line, but what concerns me most here is the defensive side of the football and the injuries that they have there for the San Francisco 49ers. Can they keep this game close enough going up against Patrick Mahomes and that offense where they can still utilize the running game and Jeff Wilson? If Mahomes were to get a lead early in this game, we could be looking at another nightmare for Jeff Wilson. We need this game to be close. We need this defense healthy in San Francisco. That's where we'll really flirt with those 15-touch games that we really need from Jeff Wilson Jr. How about the Pittsburgh Steelers and Miami Dolphins? We'll start off with Najee Harris. And a lot of people were glad to see a solid outing from Najee in week 6. But is it enough to really be excited about? He had 16 touches, but only got 49 total yards in those 16 touches, was saved by a touchdown, and is only averaging 3.2 yards per carry on the season, which is worse than what we saw last year, and now the volume is down. Even though he's seeing 16 touches a game, he's not having an opportunity to do much with it. His yards before contact on receptions is negative 1.1 yards behind the line of scrimmage. That means every time he catches the ball, he's 1 yard behind the line of scrimmage when the defender initiates contact. How are you supposed to succeed when stuff like that is happening to Najee Harris? It's not looking great for him efficiency-wise. Now going up against Miami, they allow the 10th most fantasy points to opposing running backs at 21.8 per game. The question here, does Kenny Pickett play, or is Mitchie Biscuits back under center if Pickett can't clear concussion protocol in time? Plus, another one of those teams, their defense is hurting, right? Can they keep the game close enough to where they can utilize Najee Harris on the ground? He is a fringe start for me. You can see he's right there on that cutoff line. He needs more volume for the efficiency numbers that we're seeing. I'm just not so sure we're going to see more volume, especially if Mitchie Biscuits is under center. I got him as a start, but if it wasn't for bye weeks, I probably wouldn't, if I'm being completely honest. How about for the Miami Dolphins? You got Raheem, not quite a must-start Mostert, but still a start. I mean, not so much for Chase Edmonds, right? Chase Edmonds hasn't done nothing. These are two guys, though, that are still outside the top 30 overall in scoring. Mostert is the clear leader in this backfield, but he's only had one game over 10 fantasy points all year. So can we get excited about this guy? Not a whole lot. Even though he's the clear number one guy in the backfield, Mostert's still only seeing 13 touches a game. Now going up against Pittsburgh, they allow 21 fantasy points per game. We saw Leonard Fournette find some success against this defense, and that's why I'm starting Raheem Mostert. It's more matchup based. Sounds like we could also have Tua back this week, even though there's multiple injuries on the offensive line as well. It's really hard to sit a guy getting 13 to 15 touches in a matchup against a team that allows over 20 fantasy points to the position. He's more of a low-end start, but still a start nonetheless, and that'll take us to Monday Night Football, the Chicago Bears, New England Patriots. The Bears just make me want to again, you know what I mean? It's not good here. This is just another one of those backfields that we can't really seem to figure out each and every week. It was a tough week 6 for David Montgomery. 80 total yards, no touchdowns, but he did play in 78% of the snaps, which is a good sign. He's still the clear leader in this backfield as well, and when it comes to touches, he's really out-touching Herbert 3-1. But this is a horrendous matchup for him going up against New England. They only allow 15 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs and just shut down Nick Chubb in the Cleveland Browns running game. Justin Fields himself is dealing with a shoulder injury, non-throwing shoulder, but he's still not 100%. But this is really dependent on the options you have. You have an inconsistent running back in a tough matchup with a hurt quarterback. I mean, this just sounds disastrous. Plus, you see the big plays time and again from Khalil Herbert. He's just not getting the volume. There's no way to look at this backfield and feel good about starting either one of these guys here this week. On the other side of the football, are y'all enjoying Ramondre Stevenson's season? I mean, last week he was running back 1 overall and is now up to running back 11 on the season. Hasn't scored less than 10 fantasy points in a game since week 2 and has now had at least 23 touches in back-to-back games. I mean, the takeover is in full swing, but don't count out Damian Harris if he's healthy. There's plenty of volume to go around this backfield for both of these guys to thrive. Now, Chicago allows right around 23 fantasy points per game, 7th most in the NFL, so it's a good matchup for both of these guys. But when it comes to injuries, does Mac Jones return? Damian Harris himself is still questionable. When he was injured, it was led to believe that he was going to miss multiple weeks, and then he's been questionable here the last 2 weeks, even though spotted in practice last week, didn't look like he was close to playing. They also have Nelson Aguilar and Kendrick Bourne, who are both questionable to play at the wide receiver position. Kind of similar to Mac Jones, right? When the backup is playing well, it takes pressure off having to rush back the starter. I love Damian Harris, and when he's in the lineup, he's definitely somebody who can go out there each week and get you right around 12 fantasy points. But without Damian Harris, Ramondre Stevenson could be a league winner and somebody you definitely have to start each and every week. As of right now, until we get more news on Harris, we're firing up Ramondre Stevenson on Monday Night Football here once again. But there you have it, my starts and sits for the running back position here in Week 7 fantasy football. Congratulations once again to Jordan for winning that Joe Mixon jersey. Don't forget, tune into Kyle's wide receiver video. He's got a straight banger of a giveaway coming up in that one as well. But hopefully you guys enjoyed the content. If you did, do me a favor, hit that like button and consider subscribing if you haven't already. We still have like 35% of the people that watch our videos that don't subscribe. Why not? Just subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything to do that. And then you get all the information you need to make the best decisions possible for your fantasy team. But I'm going to go ahead and get out of here for the day. Hopefully you have a great rest of your day, a great week, and we'll talk to you later.